There's a moment in life when everything seems to crumble at once, as if the ground you've always stood on simply disappears without warning. And maybe you're exactly there now, not in the middle of the chaos, but after it, in the silence that remains when everything breaks. And let me ask you a question that might hurt more than any answer. What if this place you call rock bottom isn't the end? What if, in fact, it's the only place where you can finally, truly begin? Because there's something nobody tells you, something you only discover when you have nothing left to lose. The truth is, most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid pain, running from it, distracting themselves, numbing themselves, as if feeling were a mistake. But what happens when there's no way to escape anymore? When pain finds you, traps you, and forces you to look inside? That's when something starts to change. Not in a beautiful way, not in a light way, but in a real way. Because rock bottom has a characteristic that nobody values. It removes all illusions. No mask remains. No character remains. Only you remain raw, vulnerable, and, for the first time, true. Carl Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by becoming aware of their own darkness. And perhaps that's what's happening to you now. This pain that seems unbearable may be exactly what's revealing parts of you that have been hidden for years. Fears you avoided, patterns you repeated, wounds you pretended didn't exist. And I know, looking at this isn't comfortable. But there's an absurd power in this confrontation. Because what you face, you begin to transform. Think for a moment. How many times have you built your life based on what others expected of you? How many decisions were made not for what you wanted, but for what seemed right in the eyes of others? And now, when everything has crumbled, perhaps what you're feeling isn't just pain. Perhaps it's also the collapse of an identity that was never entirely yours. And that's frightening, because if what you were no longer exists, who are you now? This question is uncomfortable, but it's also liberating. There's an old metaphor about the phoenix, the bird that needs to be consumed by flames to be reborn. But what almost no one realizes is that rebirth doesn't happen despite the fire. It happens because of it. Without destruction, there is no true reconstruction. And perhaps this moment in your life is exactly that. The necessary fire. The point where what no longer served you needs to cease to exist so that something new can emerge. Not better, not perfect, but more authentic. And here's something important that few people admit. Rock bottom is also a place of choice. Because when you have no more distractions, nowhere left to run, you're forced to decide. To continue sinking, or to begin, even slowly, to rise. And this choice doesn't come with motivation. It doesn't come with energy. It comes with exhaustion, with burnout. The moment when you simply can't continue as you are. And it is at this point that something changes. Not outside, but inside. If you've made it this far, there's something you need to understand. You're not alone in this feeling. Most people who go through this kind of moment don't even talk about it. And maybe that's why you feel like nobody understands. But let me tell you something. There are thousands of people watching this right now who are in exactly the same place, in silence, trying to find meaning in the midst of chaos. And if this kind of content makes sense to you, maybe it's worth subscribing, because many people watch, but few really commit to this kind of transformation. Now, let's delve a little deeper. Emotional pain isn't just suffering, it's information. It points to something that needs to be seen. When you feel a void, it didn't appear out of nowhere. When you feel anxiety, It didn't appear without reason. There's always a root, a pattern, an accumulation, and ignoring it only prolongs the cycle. The pain persists, not because it wants to destroy you, but because it wants to be understood. It's like a signal, constant, asking for attention. And perhaps what you've done most until now is try to silence that signal with distractions, with relationships, with external goals, trying to fill a void that can't be resolved externally. But now, at rock bottom, those distractions no longer work. And this, however difficult it may seem, is a rare opportunity. Because for the first time, you have the chance to hear what you've always ignored. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And perhaps what's missing isn't strength, but meaning. Because when life loses its meaning, any pain seems unbearable. But when there is a purpose, even a small one, even an undefined one, something inside you, it's starting to reorganize itself, not because everything has improved, but because now there's a direction. And here's an important question that I want you to really think about. What is this pain trying to teach you? Not superficially, but truly. What would you never have realized if you hadn't gone through this? What kind of person were you becoming before this happened? And could it be that, deep down, this collapse saved you from continuing to live something that no longer made sense? There's a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. It shows that many people, after extremely difficult experiences, not only recover, but become more aware, stronger, and more aligned with who they truly are. Not because the pain was good, but because it forced a reconstruction that would never happen otherwise. And perhaps that's exactly what's happening to you now. But this reconstruction isn't automatic. It requires presence. It requires a willingness to look inward, without running away, without masking, without trying to speed up the process. Because there's a very strong temptation to want to get out of this quickly. It's about wanting to go back to normal. But what if normal was exactly the problem? What if what you call going back is actually going backwards? Rebuilding your life isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming someone you never dared to be before. And that requires a break. It requires leaving things behind. It requires letting go of old versions of yourself. And that hurts because, in a way, it's mourning. Mourning who you were. But it's also the birth of who you can become. Now tell me, have you noticed how, in the midst of pain, some truths become clearer? People you idealized no longer seem the same. Paths that seemed right no longer make sense. Things you valued lose their importance. This isn't confusion. This is clarity emerging. But it's still an uncomfortable clarity because it demands change. And change is scary. Because there are no guarantees. There is no certainty. There is only the next step. And perhaps this is what you need to understand now. You don't need to solve your entire life today. You just need to take the next step. Even a small one. Even an imperfect one. Even without knowing exactly where it will lead. Because the movement, however small, is already the beginning of the way out. And there's something curious about rock bottom. It can also be a point of radical honesty. Because when you have nothing left to support an image, you can finally be honest with yourself. About what you feel, about what you want, about what you no longer accept. And this honesty is the beginning of any true reconstruction. If you've listened to this far, perhaps it's because, despite everything, there's still something inside you that hasn't given up. It may be weak, it may be silent, but it's there. And that matters more than anything else. because it's not the absence of pain that defines your strength. It's the decision to continue even with it. Now, I want to ask you one more question, and perhaps this is the most important of all. If this moment in your life were, in fact, a turning point, would you be willing to go through this process consciously, or will you continue trying to run away from it? Because this choice, even if it seems small, completely changes what comes next. Reconstruction doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers, in silent decisions, in internal changes that no one sees. And little by little, what seemed like the end begins to reveal itself as a new beginning. Not idealized, not perfect, but real. And perhaps, for the first time, aligned with who you truly are. In the end, rock bottom isn't a place you stay, it's a place you go through. And what defines how long you remain there isn't the pain itself, but how much you resist seeing what it's trying to show you. So maybe, just maybe, this isn't the end of your story. Maybe it's the beginning of the only version of it that's truly worth living.